Hello everyone and welcome to episode 56 of the Layton Fitness podcast. Now in today's episode we're going to be discussing the deadlift. I'm going to give you some deadlift tips. We're just going to cover the traditional deadlift today. However, with that being said, some of the key fundamental principles I'll be discussing with regards to the traditional deadlift can also be applied to the sumo deadlift. One of the key differences with the sumo and the traditional deadlift is just the stance, but the way the bar moves, the fundamental cues you should be focusing on during the lift are pretty much the same. Without further ado, let's dive straight in. For those of you who are deadlifting consistently, you probably understand the importance of good quality form. However, there's going to be a few points I'm going to be talking about today which go under the radar when you're potentially looking at someone deadlifting. These are cues that aren't really particularly visible to the naked eye. However, when you're actually following these cues, when you're actually doing the deadlift yourself, you're going to notice quite a significant improvement in how the movement actually feels. We're going to get onto those shortly. However, first of all, let's just focus on the fundamentals, the setup first, and then we'll talk about the actual movement off the floor in addition to some of the more advanced cues. So firstly, bar position. We're ideally going to get that bar position directly over the midfoot, and that basically means the bar isn't actually quite up to the shin. This is one common mistake I often see, and the reason why is, if you think about it, if you had the bar directly up against the shins, when you get into your deadlift position, the bar path is actually going to have to work around your shin and your knee, because you think about it, when you're in a traditional deadlift stance, you're going to have your shin angle is going to be slightly forward of perpendicular to the floor, and as such this will force the bar path to come around your shins and your knees, which isn't ideal. We want to get as straight a bar path as possible. So basically that bar is probably going to be about an inch away from the shins, and you're focusing on getting the bar over approximately your midfoot. Secondly, with regards to feet position, again this is going to depend on personal preference and also your limb length, but for the most part around shoulder width apart or just inside shoulder width apart. I actually saw a very good video on YouTube on the Shredded by Science YouTube page with Mike Zordo. So one of the key points he mentioned was your stance needs to be a similar position where you would perform a standing jump. So think about the foot position you'd have to do a standing jump to jump as high as possible, and typically that will be about the correct width for you performing the deadlift. So now we've got the foot position and the bar in relation to our feet. From there we're focusing on trying to get our scapula over the bar, so directly over the bar, and as a result this will mean that the hips are actually relatively high. They're probably going to be just below your shoulders. So instead of the hips and shoulders being parallel to the floor, they're going to be just below that. Now this is a common error I see. A lot of people, when they perform the deadlift, they perform the deadlift like a squat, and therefore they drop their hips way too low, and this is a common problem I actually suffered with myself personally. However, a key thing you need to think about is if your hips are too low, the scapula traditionally will be just behind the bar, and the bar cannot actually move without the scapula being directly over the bar, and as such you often get people's hips rising too quickly at the start of the deadlift, and obviously this is just a waste of energy and you're going to lose tightness in this position. So we want to focus on starting where we're actually going to move the weight. That basically means hips just below shoulders and focusing on scapula directly over the bar. Now from this position here, we've got a good setup position, chest up, back is nice and neutral. We're now going to be focusing on having a big deep breath, and then we're going to push our stomach out into the belt if you're wearing a belt, or if you're not wearing a belt, you almost want to feel like the brace position you would get into if someone was about to punch you in the stomach. So that is that feeling, so focus on driving those abs out. Imagine someone's going to punch you in the stomach, and I was actually watching a very good video from Chris Burgess earlier, and one of the points he mentioned was a good cue that he's used is called breaking the belt. He almost gets his clients to imagine they're breaking the belt, and this is a great cue because this forces you to push your abdominals out, and basically this is going to increase intra-abdominal pressure, and therefore you're going to be in a more powerful position. You're also going to be in a position where your back is unlikely to round throughout the movement because your core is nice and tight and braced. However, you'd be surprised how many people do not do this, yet this makes a huge difference. If you try this next time you do your deadlift, you'll be amazed at the difference it makes. From there, we're then focusing on only breathing out once you've actually completed the movement. So once you've actually locked out the deadlift, then you're going to bring the weight back down to the floor. Big deep breath again, push that abdominal wall out into the belt, or push out as far as possible if you're not wearing a belt, and then complete the movement. Another couple of cues is, instead of actually thinking of lifting the bar off the floor, I actually want you to think about doing the opposite, and that basically means imagine you're trying to push your midfoot through the floor. Now again, this will make another huge difference because you'll be more explosive, you'll be much tighter, and while you're imagining you're trying to push that midfoot through the floor, you're also going to squeeze your glutes. So these are the three key principles I alluded to at the start of the podcast when I said there's certain principles that aren't really visible to the naked eye if you watch, say, a deadlift YouTube video, but if you apply this, you'll notice the dramatic improvements in your deadlifts. You're focusing on pushing out from the stomach, big deep breath. You're focusing on driving that midfoot through the floor. You're focusing on squeezing those glutes, and as a result you're going to get a nice fluid movement. You're going to be very tight and braced. There's going to be no wasted energy because of lack of tightness. The next you want to think about is actually trying to pull your hands behind you. So when you've got your hands on the bar, when you're in your start position, you're going to be focused on really driving those hands back. And what this is going to do is this is going to help engage the lats during the movement. This can really help improve your strength in addition to being in a tighter position. So you're focused on driving your hands behind you, and that will help to engage your lats. Another key point is don't bounce the weight off the floor. You'll see a lot of people doing this, but you need to realise that the exercise is called a deadlift for a reason. There needs to be a dead stop position. So at the end of each rep, make sure that weight is resting on the floor, and then you're going to do a big deep breath again, and then go through the movement. Midfoot through the floor, squeeze glutes, firing those hips through, bracing that core effectively. Next point I alluded to throughout this podcast as well is trying to keep that bar path straight, and that comes from setup. That comes from making sure the bar is close to the shins, but not so close that the bar has to move around your shins and your knees, and you're trying to focus on that straight up and down bar path. And I know there's a few apps you can get on your phone now to actually record. If someone records you from a side angle, they can actually track the bar path, and that can be very useful. Next point I've mentioned during this podcast is potentially using a belt. A belt isn't necessarily mandatory, however, most people typically are stronger just because it allows you to increase intra-abdominal pressure, allows you to actually brace against something when you're bracing your core, and it really does make a big difference in terms of that feeling of being tight around the core area before you lift the weight off. Another quick tip is to try and use chalk or liquid chalk. You can get these very cheaply online now, and they're not as messy as traditional chalk, the liquid one, and it can make a difference with regards to your grip strength, which can be a weakness potentially for certain people's deadlifts. So hopefully you found this useful. Like I mentioned, the real key principles I wanted to impress upon you today was the pushing out with regards to your stomach, breaking the belt, that feeling of really pushing out from the stomach, focusing on driving the midfoot through the floor, and focusing on squeezing your glutes. If you do those three things in a proper setup, you're going to see some dramatic improvements in your deadlifts. Hopefully you can start applying this immediately. If you're still yet to download my free ebook, How to Set Up a Nutrition Plan, if you go to James Layton, Layton Fitness.co.uk, you'll see a tab at the top of the page. You can download that immediately. You can also learn more about myself, some of the other podcasts and videos and articles I've got on the website, and you can also learn more about my services and products as well. Thank you very much. I look forward to speaking to you next week. Take care.